So if you happen to be a fan of the Persona series, this week has been a pretty good week for you, because Atlus has released two new rhythm games, actually, for the PlayStation Vita and PlayStation 4, based on Persona 3 and Persona 5. If you happen to buy a special limited edition version of that game in Japan, you would get a pack with the two base games in it and a couple of extras, most significant of which was a download code for Persona 4 Dancing All Night. That was previously a PlayStation Vita exclusive, but the code that you got in the pack was for the PlayStation 4 version of the game. And the reason that a lot of fans of Persona 4, Persona Dancing All Night, and Persona series in general went and got this limited edition is because Atlus apparently has no plans on releasing Persona 4 Dancing All Night as a separate release on the PlayStation 4 for sale. This is only something that you'll be able to get as a kind of limited edition bonus through this pack. At least that's the intention for now. So in order to make sure that you got your copy of it, of course, you kind of had to buy the limited edition. Who knows, down the track, they probably will release it as a standalone release because it's a popular game and people love it. But for now, that's the only way you can get it, and that's how I got it. So I got my in-laws over in Japan to get a copy of the limited edition pack sent to them, and I got them to then email me the download code, which is what you are seeing on the screen there in front of you. This is the PlayStation 4 version of Persona 4 Dancing All Night. So I didn't think there was much of a point of doing a separate review of this game because it is exactly the same game as the PlayStation Vita version, with all of the same tracks, the same story mode, although it's in Japanese. There's no English version, so you'd need to be able to read Japanese to read the story this time around. And no additional features, no additional costumes, nothing like that. It's the same game as the PlayStation Vita game. It's just now in PlayStation 4 resolution in 1080p and whatnot, which is great if you happen to be, like me, a fan of one of the characters and enjoy the costumes and the fan service that this game has quite a bit of. Now it's in high resolution, 1080p. Rise in her Arabian army here is a pretty good thing as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, like I said, rather than do a separate video review or a written review of the game, because that would be a bit redundant and I've got better things to do with my time, I thought I'd just do a video looking at, I guess, why I think this is probably the best spin-off title for a game that I've ever seen. Because the thing was, when this game was first announced, it kind of weirded a lot of people out, because Persona 4 is obviously known for having a rich story, rich characters. It's an JRPG, so it's full of combat system mechanics and all that, and people who are fans of Persona 4 are fans of that kind of 60-hour long JRPG with intense story and, you know, all the combat and the dungeons. And a rhythm game is a very big departure from the JRPG system. So a lot of people were a little bit unsure about how it would work, if it would work, and I think I would like to say that most people were pleasantly surprised for it. I don't think there are too many people who were not fans of Persona 4 Dancing All Night who were fans of Persona 4. But what makes Persona 4 Dancing All Night quite special? Well, it's a couple of things, I think. The first thing is the story mode itself. I mean, nobody goes to a rhythm game expecting a great story or an in-depth story or anything like that. But with Persona 4 Dancing All Night, they actually kind of got it. It's not as long as a JRPG. I think you could clock it in about, 8 hours, 10 hours or thereabouts. I haven't played it again on this version, so it's been a good year and a bit since I last played the story mode through. But it is quite extended. It's enough to tell a good story, and the developers did a really good job of setting it at a period a little bit past the events of Persona 4, so this was a bit of a reunion story as such, and it brought all the characters together to go on another adventure. And yes, they weren't fighting with, swords and magic and all that kind of stuff in their personas, but they were doing, it was a fun way of bringing all the characters together. And the structure of it is basically that they get pulled back into the Dark World, but this time, rather than fight them through the JRPG system, they have to engage in kind of dance battles as such, which sounds silly, I know, but it's a really charming way of doing a kind of a reunion story without resting on those kind of violent elements from the JRPG or the darker elements. This is very light-hearted, this is very bubbly, it's very charming, it's about being, bright and happy and all that kind of stuff, and the rhythm game structure suits that a little bit better, I think, than the JRPG structure. So I think the way that the story is told is really impressive in, giving everybody a chance to come back to their favorite characters, play with them again, see what's happened to them in the events since Persona 4, because Persona 4, without giving spoilers, you don't need to tune this out if you haven't played the game yet, but Persona 4 finishes in such a way that you are left wondering what is going to happen to these characters next. How are their lives going to progress from here? So this game kind of answers that a little bit, and for people who really love Persona, who've played it over and over and over again, that is a really nice touch that the developers went to such an effort to give a decent story mode into the game. So music is of course very, very important to any rhythm game, and I think the developers of Persona 4 Dancing All Night were lucky in that they had a great soundtrack to work with in the original Persona 4 soundtrack, but also they did a really genius job of taking that soundtrack and making it work in the context of a rhythm game as well. So for people who haven't played Persona 4, the soundtrack is absolutely amazing in that it would be something that you could go into a store in a Japanese kind of music shop and pick up a CD off any of the J-pop sections, and it would sound like it belonged in that kind of section of the CD store, as opposed to, I guess, the more cinematic or orchestrated scores of most video games out there. Persona 4 had a very different tone, or Persona series in general has a very different tone in that it uses the music to really kind of capture that youth culture vibe that in the stories that it's telling, because it's telling stories of youth and the adventures they go on and the kind of their coming to terms with growing up and all those kind of issues as they go through their coming of age. And the music was really there as a way of kind of, providing that backdrop to those experiences. So in that context, having that kind of J-pop vibe to it really benefited the story of Persona 4 and also, the characterization and the game in general. So the developers of Persona 4 Dancing All Night had this great soundtrack which could have come straight off the shelves of the J-pop section to work with, which is just perfect for a rhythm game, because a rhythm game needs certain types of music to work as well. It needs music that has good strong beat. It needs music that is catchy and easy to listen to over and over and over again, because you are going to listen to them over and over and over again in trying to get good scores and all that kind of stuff. And that's why, if you're into Hatsune Miku, for example, the Hatsune Miku rhythm games work really well because they have that same sense of strong beat and very catchy music, and it's very easy to listen to, so you kind of can sit there and enjoy the same music over and over again. Persona 4 Dancing All Night has much that same thing, and the developers have done a really good job in not just taking the Persona 4 music and just copying it wholesale into the new game. They also created a whole bunch of remixes which again are specifically tuned to the rhythm game experience to enhance the beat, to enhance the rhythm, to enhance the catchiness of the music. So while there's not a huge amount of music on the game in itself, and the remixes, I think there's 5 or 6 remixes of one particular track as part of the soundtrack. So the raw number of music tracks that are used in the game is relatively limited, but the remixes all create a very different sound, and they create a very different tone, which makes the dancing routine very different. The gameplay itself, the appearance of the icons on the screen, and all that kind of stuff is all very different from one track to the next. And it's a great, again, it's really nostalgic for people who played Persona 4, and it really works on that level, but at the same time, it's a really clever way of taking something that's so different, a soundtrack created for a JRPG, and turning it into something that works in the context of a rhythm game. And I think, again, one of the reasons that Persona 4 Dancing All Night is such a special example of a rhythm game and as a kind of spin-off is it's not just a lazy job to take something that people loved and then shove it into a different genre, because there's plenty of examples that out there that have happened, but this game really goes that extra step to create a game with its own identity, but one that is still very much tied to the original material. And I just love the presentation of the game as well. It's so bright and colourful, but that's not just what's so great about it. The colours and the energy that the game has, and it has energy in colour in spades, but all of that kind of, it's all done with a very specific purpose. The developers clearly wanted to capture that 70s disco style aesthetic, and everything is tuned to it. It's not just that they've they've gone and researched the way that bold colours kind of clash with one another, and the neon glow works in the context of a disco dance hall. They haven't just gone and watched some videos like Saturday Night Fever and then copied the colour across. They've also gone to all the effort to kind of capture the same sense of dance through the various characters' moves. Each character has their own different dance steps, but they're all that same kind of silly disco style, which is not something people go out and dance for fun anymore, but people enjoy watching it because it is, it's all done in a great sense of fun. And while these characters don't dance like professionals, that's kind of the point as well, because they're not professional dancers. They're just people that are, well, Risei's a professional idol, but the other characters are not professional dancers. They're just people that are having a great time dancing. And that gives the game a great personality all in itself. Even if you just watch the video clips, even if you hadn't played Persona 4 in the first place, just watching this game in action, you get a great sense that each character has their own distinct personalities, each dance has its own style, and every single track as a result, even though the dancing itself is always on a stage rather than kind of video clip style, even though there's not a whole huge range of variety in terms of the way that each track is presented, the dancing itself and the character movements and all that personality gives every single track in the game a very different feel, which is really important because, again, you spend the majority of your time in Persona 4 Dancing All Night playing a rhythm game. It's really important that what you see is attractive enough and enjoyable enough and different enough that it doesn't become dull after 2 or 3 different tracks. None of this is to suggest that Persona 4 Dancing All Night is the perfect rhythm game, because of course it's not. It has its issues, and it will be interesting to see if the developers are able to address some of those in the context of Persona 3 and Persona 5 dancing games. The most significant one, I guess, is that there are notable omissions from the soundtrack of Persona 4 in Persona 4 Dancing All Night, with some of my very favourite tracks from the game, from the original JRPG, not showing up in here at all. And while I think the developers have done an amazing job with the remixes and all of that kind of stuff, I would have thought that having a bit more variety in the soundtrack would have been a good idea, especially when, by rhythm game standards, the track list is fairly thin up front. I thought it might have been DLC'd in later on at a later date, and that didn't happen. The only DLC that kind of happened was some costumes and things from memory. There wasn't too much music, if any, that was DLC'd in, so I think there was a bit of a missed opportunity there, and I would certainly hope that the developers would take that on board so that Persona 3 and Persona 5 dancing games have a broader track list with more of people's favourite songs from the base game in there, so nobody's really kind of feeling left out. The other issue is that in Persona 4 Dancing All Night, specific characters are actually locked to tracks. So if you're a huge fan of Risei, like I am, and you would want to use her in basically every track because you like that character that much more than the other characters in the game, you can't do that. You can only play maybe 3 or 4 tracks, I think, with Risei across the entire game, which does feel quite limited, especially when you then might have favourite songs within Persona 4 Dancing All Night that a character that you're not such a huge fan of is attached to. So, for example, I'm not a huge fan of the character of Nanako from Persona 4, but the Nanako in Persona 4 Dancing All Night actually has quite a few tracks that she's locked to, and some of the music there is really great, but I'm kind of stuck using that character. It would have been nice to be able to, use your favourite character with your favourite track, but like you said earlier, of course, each character has their own personality and dance style, so perhaps if the characters were then kind of able to move between tracks, the game would lose some of its personality, the music would, the dance routines would not feel quite as strong. So I can kind of see where the developers might have been coming from that perspective, but certainly it's something I hope Persona 3 and 5 dancing games have found a way of addressing. Anyway, thanks very much for watching that video. I love this game, and I look forward to my reviews of the other 2 rhythm games soon.